Good evening, everyone. We will now begin the evening service of the Miroku Association headquarters, expressing our gratitudes to God and Meishu-sama for blessings and protection received while participating in the construction of paradise on earth. Amatsu-Norito and Miroku Prayer, please stand. アマハラリカムズマリマスカムロギカムロミノミコトモチエスメミオヤカムイザナギノミコトつくしのイムラのタチハオロノアギハラニイソギハライタモウトキになりません。アライドの神たちよもろもろのまがろと罪汚れを払いたまえ清めたまえとまをすことのよしを天津神国津神やおりのすの神たちともに雨の淵駒の耳振りかけておしめせかしこみをまおす広くおみかみ守りたまえ先はえたまえ広くおみかみ守りたまえ先はえたまえお 教えみよや主の神、守りたまえ、先はえたまえ。教えみよや主の神、守りたまえ、先はえたまえ。こんながら魂生えます。こんながら魂生えます。Great God of light, creator and giver of all life, in accordance with your divine will, the long age of night draws to an end. Your radiant divine light, shining ever more brilliantly, awakens the dawn of the glorious age of light, a time long awaited by all humanity. We thank you for guiding us to your divine plan, and for the privilege of channeling and receiving Johrei. May our spirits and bodies be illuminated and purified as we live your truth given to us by Meishu-sama. Make us pure and effective instruments of your divine light, so that we may serve you and all those with whom we come in contact. May paradise on earth be realized, with health, peace, and prosperity, a reality in our lives. Great God of light, bless and protect us. Radiate our souls with your divine light, so that we may truly become instruments of your great plan. Please be seated. We will now receive group Johrei.
May God and Meishu-sama bless you.
Johrei is now concluded. We will now listen to a reading from Meishu-sama's teachings. God's plan. How can God's great plan to dispel humanity's errors and purify the universe be perceived by our limited human sight? For thousands of years, for eons, God has waited for the right time. It has arrived. God's plan is being fulfilled. God's great plan for paradise on earth must begin somewhere, with a small prototype in the material world. Our goal is to construct paradise on earth. This ideal world is about to be born. According to the revelation I received, the foundation of paradise on earth has already been established in the spiritual realm. Therefore, there is no doubt that it will materialize on earth in the near future. What a fortunate time it is in which we have been born. The thought of this fills us with joy. How might it occur? Suppose someone wished to build a magnificent home in the place of an existing structure. The old house first has to be taken down. Some of the building blocks of that house, such as lumber, can be used again for the new building, but only after they have been selected, washed clean, shaved with the plane, and polished. The same principle is involved in the construction of paradise on earth. Thus, even though some events that will happen may seem unreasonable, illogical, unproductive, or even destructive from a human perspective, please understand it. Please understand that what is actually happening is a major purification of an accumulation of clouds. It's all part of the profound plan of God and cannot be judged with our limited perception. We should act with humility, being careful not to question God's will and remaining faithful. No matter what circumstances arise, whether unprecedented, unusual, or destructive, it is important to keep our peace of mind. This is possible only for those who have deep faith and trust in God. In the meantime, we should enjoy life and wait for the right time, leaving the final outcome in God's hands.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this evening service of the Miroku Association headquarters. This evening, I would like to share two faith experiences with you. One is from Peru. This one is from Mariela Montoya. Mariela Montoya wants to thank God and Meishu-sama for the permission to share with you this experience related to an advanced course for membership too. Just knowing that as a prerequisite to attend the course, she had to do a lot of reading on Meishu-sama's teachings. She made a series of excuses for not signing up. As the insistence of several people happened, she was encouraged, including her husband, who was one of the first to participate in the pilot course, and her daughter, who also started in another group. In the first class, which was the introduction to the entire course, she realized that she was not going to make it. Upon receiving a list of various teachings, she thought it was impossible to learn them all. When she began reading them, she tried to concentrate, and the memory of her uncle, who is in the spiritual realm, came to her mind. He, along with her grandmother, raised Mariela, and as a young girl, every time she wanted to go out to play or talk with her friends, he would send her to read. And then she had to tell them what she had understood from the readings. She had to read thick books of scientists and philosophers like Plato, Pythagoras, Galileo Galilei, etc. From then on, reading was a punishment for her. She was trying to concentrate to understand, but she could not because of anger or not enjoy a moment with her friends. The only thing she had left was to memorize it, and yet she was reprimanded by just forgetting a word of that reading. By taking on the challenge of participating in the little school, as the members affectionately call this advanced course, several of her classmates and herself had purifications in different ways. Several things were reported, such as those who had the flu, decompensation of the body, very strong headaches, infections, stomach aches, conflicts, etc. However, little by little, she was discovering a process to have understanding about what she was reading. She would walk and read aloud, so she no longer fell asleep. She began to take an interest in new reading, especially when reading the life and work of Meishu-sama, in addition to the enthusiasm of knowing that the new compilation of teachings was soon coming off the press to continue her reading. At the beginning and at the end of each class, she prayed in front of the altar and asked God and Meishu-sama to allow her to understand their teachings. She also asked help from her uncle's spirit, as she did not want to have that feeling of blaming him for her not wanting to read, and thus, without realizing, that feeling was naturally changing. She remembered that if she is a Johrei member, to him because more than 30 years ago, her uncle brought her to the Johrei Center. Being part of the advanced course was more than attending a conventional class. For her experience, it was generating strength in the spiritual realm that materialized in each one, in their families, and in the environment where they find themselves. In conversations with her family and talking about the teachings, could overcome their difficulties, supported by the understanding of the teachings. Their home atmosphere is already different. It has changed. Now, with every topic being well absorbed and learned, many of the course's participants were willing to challenge themselves and give their love and time to the divine word. In short, Mariella not only completed the course, but she also gained strength to further read and learn with the teachings of Meishu-sama. She discovered points that she can work on to improve herself. She gained patience and strength to give more service, and even more so, she perceived the salvation of her uncle, the ancestor who guided her. Mariella expresses her gratitude to the organizers of the advanced course for the time and dedication in preparing it, and she thanks the wonderful group that shared their time and experiences together for weeks. It's a nice experience from Mariela from Peru. And the second experience, which I would like to share, is from Milan, Italy. It's from Magali Torres Espinosa. Magali Torres is Peruvian, and she has lived in Italy for 27 years. She received the sacred focal point of Hikari 3 years ago in Lima, Peru, and currently gives service at the Johrei Center in Milan. She would like to share her faith experience, which happened before and during this pandemic, and that relates to her ancestors. She always had an eating disorder, but 2 years ago, this purification intensified as and she began to have complications with swallowing. She could not ingest anything solid because she was afraid of dying from suffocation, sometimes taking up to 2 hours to be able to eat a single meal. Over time, this situation worsened, and in February last year, in order to be able to eat, she had to process the food in a blender and dilute it with plenty of water. She was afraid, felt insecure and distressed, but At the same time, she wanted to understand what was happening to her. Since she could not find a logical explanation, Magali asked her minister for guidance, who advised her to intensify the basic practice of faith, especially the Johrei channeling, the study and practice of God's teachings revealed to Meishu-sama, and prayers. As in the city where she lives, there are no other members, she channeled self-Johrei before each meal. Gradually, she began to reflect, trying to understand why she was having to go through this situation. She continued to practice the guidance received and gradually felt a little better. The following month, because of the pandemic, we are all in confinement. When not feeling good, she would call the minister for help. He always stressed that this purification was related to her ancestors and that she should change her thoughts and feelings, asking them for forgiveness and expressing to them her feelings of gratitude. As they had to stay home, she ended up having plenty of time to devote herself to spirituality, and without expecting, memories and reflections about her mother began to emerge. Her mother had a stroke, and for this reason, in her last years of life, she was forced to feed herself through her nose using a tube. As Magali thought of her, sad memories emerged, such as an episode in which one day it was Magali's responsibility to feed her mother. But since she needed to go out, she did so in a wishy-washy way. Although she could not speak, she was conscious. She listened to what the family were saying. And today, Magali is sure that on those occasions, she was sad and hurt. The days went by, and she found herself using the same food supplement her mother used. In addition, she remembered that in order to feed her mother, she had to grind the food in a blender in the same way that she had been doing for herself lately. At that moment, Magali realized that she was experiencing the same purification like her mother's. However, despite all of this, she was still a little skeptical that her mother's own purification could have any influence on her own. Since she does not have yet the home altar in Meishu-sama's picture, she went to her bedroom to meditate and pray silently. As soon as she finished the prayer, her attention was drawn to a jewelry box where she keeps as a souvenir a lock of her mother's hair. And when she turned to the door, that despite being almost closed, allowed her to see her mother's photograph in the other room. At that very moment, she had no more doubts and was deeply moved. Magali believes that if she had not received the guidance from the minister, she would not have realized those messages from the spiritual realm for her to change. Immediately, Magali asked her mother for forgiveness, and with a heart full of gratitude, she began to pray for her. She began to gradually improve, but not as much as she wished. She felt like something was missing, but she didn't know exactly what. One day, however, in addition to swallowing problems, she also began to suffer from panic attacks, fast heart beating, and shortness of breath. She had difficulty breathing and was constantly anxious. In times of crisis, she would call the minister, who would listen to her and calm her down. There were times when she called him several times a day. Later, she understood the origin of this new purification. That very week, three of her relatives had died of a heart attack. First her cousin, then her aunt, and finally her uncle. An entire family died out in the course of a week, leaving no descendants. She cannot even imagine the suffering and despair they felt at their last moments. She remembered that in life they had conflict problems with her mother, and that before her return to the spiritual realm, these family situations were still pending. Then she understood that both the panic attacks and her difficulty in breathing were related to her ancestors. She spoke about this situation to the minister, who explained to her that although she considered them negative people, she should be grateful to them, as they were used by God in Meishu-sama and by her ancestors to cleanse the spiritual clouds of her family. So he advised her to do the enshrinement of her ancestors, Johrei Saishi, so that they could receive the light of God, participate in the divine work, and thus purify and elevate themselves in the spiritual realm. He also explained to her that this is an effective way to save our ancestors, and that their happiness is naturally reflected on our lives. After requesting the Sorei Saishi of the spirit of her mother and her relatives, Magali gradually realized the spiritual strength we get by sincerely requesting the enshrinement of our ancestors. With each passing day, she got better, was more confident, and was able to feel gratitude for all of her ancestors. It's been several months since her last panic attack. Purification with swallowing improved to the point that she can claim to have a practically normal eating life. From time to time, very rarely, the fear of eating returns, but now she manages to control herself. She feels that this miracle is the result of a change in her feelings towards her ancestors, and that thanks to the prayers and the accumulation of good deeds, the ancestors received the light of God and Meishu-sama, helping in their elevation in the spiritual realm. Currently, she has opened the doors of her home so that it could become a Johrei gathering place, and she's following up and assisting 10 frequent visitors. Once a month, they receive a face-to-face visit from the minister to study the teaching of the month and practice Johrei. And once a week, they meet online to study the teachings of God revealed to Meishu-sama. Magali is very happy to see that little by little, their group steadily grows. She has had a great desire to one day be able to open a Johrei center in the city where she lives, to better serve God and Meishu-sama in the salvation of as many people as possible. Magali is very thankful to God and Meishu-sama for the opportunity to grow with her ancestors, for giving us the joy of living and permission to serve in the divine work. She also wants to give special thanks to her mother, who from the spiritual realm utilized and guided her to make her grow in faith, and to her minister, who throughout this period helped her to overcome this difficult purification. Very nice experience from Magali, Milan, Italy. I want to thank you very much for listening to these words. Wish you a very blessed evening, and tomorrow we have our service here at 11 a.m. Hope you can join us. Thank you very much.
This brings to a conclusion our evening service. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a blessed evening. Live vídeo